Good morning, students. So today we are going to be looking at function and mapping, basically for IGCSE mathematics and ADMAT related parts of it. So um, so I will also like you to subscribe to my channels and like them for all my previous videos that I've sent you. So let's look at this as introduction. So you already know what they call substitution when you are given an equation, which is y is equal to 5x minus 1. It's called a linear equation, quadratic equation, just an equation. Now they ask you to substitute x into the equation. If you look at the equations there, if x is 2 in the first equation, it is definitely going to give you 9. How did they get it? So you have y, you have y half y half y is equals to 5 times 2 given to you minus 1, which will give you 10 minus 1, which will give you like what you got there, 9. You see, the same thing happens to the second one. If y if s is 2, the answer that you will get there will become so how do you do that? The answer that you get there will become 60. That means x is going to be 2 square, which is 4, and 4 times 4 will give you 16. And the other one, if x is 2, 2 square will give you 4, and 100 divided by 4 will give you 25. And the other one, x raised to power 2, which is 8 raised to power 2, will give you 64. This is the basic substitution that you already know in your checkpoint days. So let's move on to what a function is and what a function is not. That way, it will help you to be able to um, understand this very well. Now, supposing there is a input and output. An equation always going to have x and y. Not every equation anyway, they can have different alphabets in relation to it. But when we are talking about a graph, any equation that can be plotted on a graph are always going to have x and y, because in a graph, you're always going to have x as this and y as this. So we know that the x axis is usually the horizontal and y axis is the vertical. So those days when you did mapping, the x, let us say this is the x and this is the y. So, so the input, x is the input. When we put the x, input is known as x and output is known as y. What do I mean by input? For example, when you have y is equals to 5x plus 1. So for you to know y, you need to know what the value of x is. So we say that x is independent. X is independent. It does not need it does not actually need y. So it's independent. Why for y to exist, you need x. So y is dependent. Independent. Y is dependent variables. So dependent variable. So independent variable is x. So when there is a rule, a relationship between x and y is called a mapping. Any rule that connects x to y is called a mapping. So for example, if the rule that connects x to y is 1, x plus 1. So if x is 1, y automatically will be 2. If x is 2, y automatically will be 3. And if x is 4, y automatically will be 5. So when there is a rule connecting x to y, it's called a mapping. So that is the first thing we are going to be looking at. Then it's not every mapping that is a function, but like I said, but every function is also a mapping. So what is a mapping per se? A mapping, a function, I mean to say, a function is a mapping, like I said, such that every element of the domain is mapped exactly to one element of the range. Now, there are concepts here now you are not hearing now that you have not had before: domain and range. So I want to explain it again to you. So the input value, which I said is the x, is the um, is the domain, while the output value, which I say is y, is the codomain or range. So the input value, you call it domain, domain. You can also call it pre-image, pre-image. You can also call it input. While the output value, like we know, output is known as codomain. It's also known as range, and also known as image. Image in the sense that if the formula connecting them, like we did before, is x plus 1, and the x is 1, y automatically will be 2. So the image of 1 is 2. So the correction of all the images becomes what is known as range. As range. So according to definition, a function is a mapping such that every element of domain, that means every element that is in the input, is mapped to exactly one element of the range. So when every element in domain is mapped to exactly one element in the range of those domain, is called a mapping. Okay, so that is like, look at the example here. There's every element in the domain that has the element in codomain, and this one we call it many to many. That means many people in the input have gone to many places in the output. The same way, many places in the output, many people in the input have visited it. So we call that one a many to many function or mapping. So at this particular one, it's called mapping anyway. At this particular one, we call it many to one relationship, where many people in the input have the size of the output. So at this particular one, where many people, many inputs have access to one input have access to many outputs. This one we call it one to many. But the one thing again I want you to know is that it's not every mapping that is a function. So in the other way, there are three basic categories in ADMAT of function that we are going to be looking at. And those one is three basic, and three of them is one to one mapping, many to one mapping, and one to many mapping. So when one input produce exactly one output, it's called one to one mapping. Example of a kind of mapping is um, a linear equation. Why? When many, for example, when many to one is when two input value have exactly one output. For example, x squared, a quadratic graph. Because if you have x squared here, um, minus 2 square will give you 4, and 2 square will also give you 4. One input will give you two inputs will give you one the same output. It's called many to one. While the last one we are going to be looking at is one to many outputs. One to many outputs, for example, square root value of any number. For example, square root of 9 is going to be negative or positive of 3, meaning that one input is going to give you two answers. Now, but it's important to know that one to many is not a function, it's just a mapping or a relation. But one to one and many to one is a function. With that example, you'll be able to understand. I've explained to you earlier what domain and codomain is. And I explained to you what a decoration of all the codomain is known as image or range. What again do you need to know in mapping before we proceed? Now, mapping notation, that is where the work can now start. Mapping can be represented right now in three ways. In three ways. One of what is those ways? One of them, you already know it as a mapping, though. You already know it. It's going to come out as a mapping. What do I mean by come out as a mapping? Like you have a diagram, you map one against the other. So you say it come out as a mapping. So so that is the thing that is there. For example, when you have a set input value of A and you have an output value of Y. So this particular one is known as is known as map notation using the diagram. So another way of the notation of mapping is by graph, which is a quadratic graph will always look like this or like this, depending on the nature of the A. While a linear graph will always look like this or like this, depending on the A also. So, so that means that it can be represented as a graph, can be written as a diagram, and finally it can be written as algebraic notation, which is these two things you are doing here. So when you have f of x is equal to these two things actually mean the same thing. It's equals to this. So this is a way of denoting graph. So you say that it's a function of f of x. Now let's look at a little bit of this so that it will help us to understand better this mapping rule. I guess I want to stop here so that I can now go back and be able to have more work so that the video will not be that much. Check the next video so that you can be able to understand in detail what we are going to be doing on this. Thank you. What is function? That is where I'm going to start the next video.